The Mafia boss asked the black maid for advice as a joke, but her words changed his life. It was a typical afternoon at the Grand Valentino estate, where the marble floors gleamed under the bright chandelier lights, and the sound of distant laughter echoed from the lavish banquet hall. Dominic Valentino, the Mafia boss, was pacing back and forth in his private study, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished wooden desk. He had just received a call from one of his most trusted men, but the news was troubling. A rival group was closing in on his territory, and he needed a way to defuse the situation before it escalated into an all-out war. He had dealt with situations like this before, but today, something felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that his usual tactics wouldn't work this time. He needed a new perspective, something fresh. But who could he turn to? His mind raced through the list of his closest associates, all powerful, all experienced. But none of them had the calm demeanor he needed right now. That's when he noticed her, Sophia, the maid. She had been working in his household for over a year now. A quiet, unassuming woman, always doing her job without drawing attention to herself. Her presence was almost invisible, like a shadow in the corners of the mansion. But today, something about her struck him differently. He had seen her walking through the hall earlier, and she had looked at him with such calmness that it almost startled him. She was different from the others. Maybe I should ask her, he thought, half joking to himself. Dominic had never considered seeking advice from anyone outside his inner circle, let alone a maid. But the more he thought about it, the more intrigued he became. Maybe she had an insight he was missing. The idea was absurd, but what did he have to lose? With a deep breath, he strode over to where Sophia was cleaning the grand staircase, her movements fluid and graceful as she polished each step. Sophia, he called, his voice low and commanding. She paused and turned, her dark eyes meeting his. Yes, Mr. Valentino, she asked, her tone respectful but not fearful. I need your advice on something, he said, surprising both of them. She raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. My advice, sir? She asked. Yes, he replied, leaning against the banister. There's a situation I need to handle, and I can't seem to find the right solution. I need a fresh perspective. What would you do if you were in my position? Sophia stared at him for a long moment, her eyes flicking between his face and the ornate chandelier above them. Dominic could see the gears turning in her mind, but he didn't expect much. She was just a maid after all, with no knowledge of the criminal world he inhabited. But then, with a calmness that took him off guard, she spoke. Sometimes, the solution is not to fight, she said softly. You don't need to crush your enemies to win. You just need to outlast them. Dominic blinked, not quite understanding. Outlast them, he repeated, his mind racing. Yes, she said, her voice steady. Sometimes, it's better to let them think they've won. Let them wear themselves out. Then, when they're weak, you can strike. But only when they're vulnerable. That's when you win, without ever having to dirty your hands. For a moment, Dominic stood there, stunned. Her words, simple as they were, made a kind of sense that he hadn't considered before. It was a strategy he had never used. Patience, subtlety, letting his enemies destroy themselves. It was genius. He had expected something trivial, something naive. But this woman, this maid, had given him the kind of advice that could change everything. You're telling me to let them make the first move, then watch them tear each other apart? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Sophia nodded. Exactly, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Sometimes, the strongest move is to do nothing at all, at least not until the right moment. Dominic couldn't believe what he was hearing. Here he was, the most powerful man in the city, seeking advice from someone who had spent her life cleaning floors and serving meals. And yet, she had just given him the most profound advice he'd heard in years. He took a step back, feeling a rush of respect for her that he hadn't expected. You're right, he said, his voice softening. Thank you, Sophia. And just like that, everything had changed. In that brief moment, Sophia had gone from being an invisible servant in his mansion to a person who had altered the course of his life with nothing more than a few simple words. Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger. Something told him that Sophia would play a much bigger role in his life than he ever expected. Dominic Valentino stood in his office, staring out of the massive windows that overlooked the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. Sophia's words echoed in his head. Let them think they've won. Let them wear themselves out. It seemed so simple, yet so profound. It was advice he had never considered before. For years, Dominic had been in control of his empire, never hesitating to crush anyone who stood in his way. But now, for the first time, he found himself questioning his own methods. The next morning, Dominic sat in his office with his closest advisors, going over the latest intelligence reports. The rival group that had been causing trouble had made their move. They were trying to gain control of one of his most lucrative territories. It was a classic power grab, and it was something he had dealt with countless times before. But this time, something was different. His usual tactics didn't feel right. He was tempted to rush in, take immediate action, and show them who was in charge, but Sophia's voice kept him grounded. Patience, he reminded himself. Outlast them. He took a deep breath and decided to play it differently. I want you to hold off for now, he told his advisors. Let them think they have the upper hand. His men exchanged glances, surprised by the sudden shift in his strategy. But boss, one of them started to protest. They're moving in on our turf. If we don't act fast, they'll take it from us. Dominic held up his hand, silencing him. I'm aware of the situation, he said, his voice calm but firm. But we're not going to react like we always do. Let them make their move. We'll bide our time and let them tire themselves out. His advisor looked uncertain but didn't question him further. As the days passed, Dominic kept a close eye on the situation. The rival group had become more aggressive, but they hadn't made any major moves yet. Dominic's patience was paying off. The longer they waited, the more the rival group's internal struggles began to show. They were fighting amongst themselves, making mistakes, and wasting resources. Meanwhile, Dominic's operation remained steady, his people keeping their heads down and waiting for the right moment. Dominic felt a sense of satisfaction as he watched his enemies implode from within. He hadn't had to lift a finger. All he had done was wait. But then, something unexpected happened. Sophia came to him again, this time in the middle of the day. She was carrying a tray of drinks for him, but when she entered his office, she stopped short. Is something wrong? Dominic asked, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. I couldn't help but notice, she began, the way you've been handling things. You're doing it differently. It's working, isn't it? Dominic was taken aback. You've been watching? He asked, surprised that she had noticed his change in approach. Sophia nodded. You seem calmer, she said. More in control, in a way that doesn't involve force. Dominic's lips curled into a slight smile. It's all because of your advice, he admitted. You were right. I didn't need to fight them. I just needed to wait. Sophia smiled back at him. Sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when to step back. Not every battle needs to be fought with force. Dominic studied her for a moment, a new respect in his eyes. He had never considered that someone like her could offer him the wisdom he needed. I never expected this from you, Sophia, he said quietly. She shrugged, as if the answer was simple. I've lived through enough to know that not every problem can be solved with violence. Dominic was silent for a moment, reflecting on her words. For the first time, he truly saw her, not just as a maid, but as someone who had something valuable to offer. He had spent his life surrounded by men who thought they had all the answers, but Sophia, a woman who worked behind the scenes, had shown him a different way. Thank you, he said, his voice sincere. You've changed the way I look at things. Sophia gave a small nod, and for the first time since they had met, Dominic saw a flicker of pride in her eyes. She had earned his respect. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. As Dominic's enemies continued to weaken themselves, he began to realize that the most dangerous weapon he could wield wasn't his power, but his ability to think differently, to outsmart his opponents without ever lifting a finger. And it was Sophia who had shown him the way. A few days had passed since Dominic Valentino took Sophia's advice to heart. The rival group that had once seemed so threatening had begun to unravel. Dominic had watched from the shadows, his patience paying off as his enemies bickered, made poor decisions, and slowly wore themselves down. His men were still on alert, but the tension had eased. He wasn't ready to celebrate yet. There was still work to do. As the day wore on, Dominic found himself reflecting more on Sophia's words. Not every battle needs to be fought with force. It sounded so simple, yet so powerful. He had spent his life fighting, crushing anyone who opposed him. But what if there was another way? What if the real strength lay in patience, in knowing when to step back and let the world do the work for him? It was a lesson that felt strange to him, yet it was one that seemed to unlock a door he had never considered. That afternoon, Dominic walked into his mansion's grand dining room, a space often used for business meetings with his associates. He was alone when he noticed Sophia, once again, moving about the room quietly, cleaning the windows. She didn't see him at first, but when she did, she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Dominic couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for her. She wasn't just some maid. She had insight, wisdom that many of his most trusted men didn't possess. He walked over to her as she finished wiping down the glass, her movements as graceful and deliberate as ever. "Sophia," he called out, his voice calm. She turned, her dark eyes meeting his. "Mr. Valentino," she responded, her voice steady, as if nothing had changed, but Dominic knew something had. "How's the situation going?" Sophia asked, her gaze not meeting his directly, but with a quiet curiosity. Dominic smiled to himself. "It's working, just as you said," he admitted. "I let them think they had the upper hand, and now they're falling apart. It's almost too easy." Sophia said nothing, but her eyes softened, a small flicker of pride in them. "I'm glad to hear it," she said quietly, and for the first time, there was no fear or hesitation in her voice. Dominic took a step closer. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low. "Your advice wasn't just about this situation, was it?" Sophia paused, looking at him, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone neutral. Dominic's eyes searched hers, and for the first time, he felt like he was seeing her not as just a servant, but as someone with a deep understanding of the world. "I think you've taught me something more than just how to deal with my enemies," he said, his voice softer now. "I've spent my life thinking that power is about control, about force. But you've shown me that sometimes it's about knowing when not to act, when to wait for the right moment." Sophia didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out the window, the soft light of the afternoon casting a glow on her face. Dominic felt a strange, unexpected warmth rise in his chest as he watched her. He had known many women in his life, but none like her. She wasn't just kind. She was wise. And there was something about her that made him feel like he wasn't the most powerful person in the room, for the first time in years. "It's not about doing nothing," Sophia finally said, her voice calm, almost philosophical. "It's about doing the right thing at the right time. The world has a way of working itself out. Sometimes, you just need to let it." Dominic nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, feeling something shift inside him. The walls he had built around himself, the ones made of power and control, began to feel less important. There was something more fulfilling than winning every battle. It was peace, real peace, and Sophia had shown him that. As the days passed, Dominic's empire continued to thrive, but he felt different. He no longer sought conflict at every turn. Instead, he found himself trusting his instincts more, allowing things to unfold on their own. And as for Sophia, her place in his world was no longer just that of a maid. She had become someone he admired, someone he wanted to protect. It was a strange feeling for him, one he wasn't used to, but it felt right. One evening, as he sat in his study, the door opened softly, and Sophia entered, holding a tray of drinks. This time, Dominic didn't just see her as a servant. He saw a woman who had changed him. "How are things?" she asked, setting the tray down in front of him. He looked up at her, his gaze warm. "Better than I ever expected," he said, his voice steady. "Thanks to you." Sophia smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "I'm glad I could help." Dominic sat back in his chair, his mind reflecting on everything that had led him here. It wasn't just about defeating his enemies anymore. It was about finding balance. And it was Sophia, the one person he least expected, who had shown him that the greatest victories often come without a single blow being struck. The days passed, and Dominic Valentino's empire continued to grow, but his approach to business had changed. No longer was he quick to anger or to resort to violence. He had learned from Sophia, the quiet maid who had offered him wisdom when he least expected it. His enemies, once a source of constant stress, now seemed insignificant. Dominic had begun to understand that true power wasn't in control, but in knowing when to let go, when to wait, and when to trust that things would unfold on their own. But that wasn't all. There was another shift happening inside him, a shift that Sophia had unknowingly sparked. It was a shift in how he saw her. No longer just a servant in his household, Sophia had become someone he deeply respected, someone he could talk to and trust. One evening, as he sat in his study, reviewing business reports, Sophia entered with a tray of coffee, her movements graceful and quiet as always. He looked up at her, his thoughts drifting. "Sophia," he said, his voice softer than usual. She set the tray down and looked at him, her dark eyes steady and calm. "Yes, Mr. Valentino," she replied, always respectful, never overstepping. Dominic hesitated for a moment, feeling an odd sense of vulnerability. "I've been thinking a lot," he began slowly, "about everything. About the way I've been living, the way I've been running things." Sophia raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "You've shown me something," he said, his voice quiet. "I've spent my whole life building this empire, but I've always done it with force, with fear. I've hurt people to get where I am. And I thought that was what power was." Sophia didn't interrupt, but Dominic could see the faintest shift in her expression, as though she was silently encouraging him to keep going. "But you've shown me that real power isn't about fear. It's about knowing when to hold back, when to trust, and when to let people see your true self." There was a long pause. Sophia said nothing, but Dominic could feel the weight of her gaze on him. He had always thought of himself as the most powerful man in the room, the one who held all the answers. But now, standing in front of Sophia, he felt small in a way that was both humbling and liberating. Sophia finally spoke, her voice as calm as ever. "Power doesn't come from hurting people, Mr. Valentino," she said softly. "It comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in that. It comes from understanding that the world doesn't need to be conquered to be yours." Dominic nodded, her words resonating deep within him. "You're right," he said quietly. "And I think I've been wrong about a lot of things." Sophia smiled slightly, but it was a smile that held a depth of understanding that Dominic hadn't seen before. "We all make mistakes," she said, "but it's what we do after that matters." For the first time, Dominic felt a genuine sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't known he was missing. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, shutting out anything that might make him vulnerable. But now, thanks to Sophia, he was beginning to see that true strength wasn't in the walls he had built, but in his ability to change, to grow, and to embrace the unexpected. Over the next few weeks, Dominic's interactions with Sophia became more frequent, though never overstepping the boundaries of their roles. He found himself seeking her advice more often, not just for business matters, but for life itself. And with each conversation, he found that his world, which had once seemed so rigid and unyielding, began to shift in ways he couldn't have imagined. One day, as they sat together in the grand library of the Valentino estate, Dominic looked over at Sophia, his mind swirling with thoughts. "Sophia," he began, "I've been thinking about something. You've been a part of this household for so long, and you've seen the way I've run things. But I want to ask you, how do you see me?" Sophia didn't answer immediately. She took a moment, looking at him with a quiet intensity. "I see a man who's been hurt," she said finally, her voice low. "A man who's built walls to protect himself, but who's also afraid to let anyone in. But I also see a man who's capable of change, a man who can be better than he thinks he is." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always seen himself as a product of his environment, a man hardened by his experiences, but Sophia had given him a glimpse of something different. She saw him not for the power he wielded, but for the man he could become. For the first time in years, Dominic felt the weight of his own vulnerability, but instead of fearing it, he embraced it. "Thank you, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me more than I could ever repay." Sophia smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm glad I could help." Dominic realized then that the greatest lesson Sophia had taught him wasn't just about strategy or patience. It was about seeing himself in a new light, about realizing that true power wasn't about dominance or control. It was about understanding who you are and being willing to change. And as he looked at Sophia, he knew that her presence in his life was no longer just a coincidence. She had changed him in ways he never could have imagined, and for that, he would always be grateful. As the weeks passed, Dominic Valentino's life seemed to settle into a rhythm he had never known before. He was still the powerful Mafia boss, but the way he navigated his empire had changed. His thoughts, once consumed by strategies of control and dominance, now had room for introspection. Sophia's influence on him had been subtle but profound. She had shifted his perspective on power, making him realize that strength wasn't just in dominance. It was in wisdom, patience, and the willingness to change. As Dominic sat in his office one quiet afternoon, a thought occurred to him. Despite everything that had happened, despite the way he had changed, he had never truly acknowledged Sophia's role in his transformation. He had been grateful, of course, but gratitude without action was meaningless. He had to show her how much she had impacted his life. Sophia was in the kitchen when he found her, quietly preparing dinner as usual. She didn't notice him at first, but he stood there for a moment, watching her. There was something serene about the way she moved, as if every action she took was deliberate, measured. He had always been in awe of her calm presence, but now, it felt more significant. "Sophia," he said, his voice breaking the silence. She turned to face him, her usual calm demeanor in place. "Yes, Mr. Valentino?" she asked, her voice steady. Dominic stepped forward, the words he had rehearsed in his mind suddenly feeling inadequate. "I've been thinking about everything, about how you've changed the way I see things," he began, choosing his words carefully. "You've given me advice that has shaped how I run my empire. But more importantly, you've shown me how to be a better man." Sophia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I didn't do anything special," she replied. "I just spoke what I believed." Dominic shook his head. "No, Sophia," he said softly. "You didn't just speak. You changed something in me. You showed me that real power doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding, from patience, from knowing when to let go." Sophia remained silent for a moment, processing his words. She had always been observant, never one to seek attention or praise, but Dominic could see that his words had reached her. "I'm just a maid," she said, her voice almost too quiet. "I'm just here to help." Dominic smiled. "You're much more than that," he said gently. "You've helped me in ways I can't fully express. And for that, I want to show you my gratitude. I want to offer you something more than just thanks." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" she asked. Dominic took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve settle within him. "I want to offer you a position. A real position in my organization. Not as a maid, but as someone who can contribute, someone whose opinion matters." Sophia looked at him, stunned. She had never imagined something like this. In all her years of service, she had never asked for anything. She had always kept her head down, focused on the tasks at hand. But now, Dominic was offering her something far greater than a simple job. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, still processing his offer. Dominic took a step closer. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his voice gentle. "Take your time. But know this, you've earned it." Sophia stood still for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. She had spent her life working for others, living in the background, never expecting more than what was asked of her. But now, in a moment, her life was changing. Dominic's offer wasn't just a job. It was a recognition of her worth, of her intelligence, and of the impact she had already made. As she looked up at him, Sophia could see that something had shifted between them. No longer was he the powerful Mafia boss, and she the invisible servant. They were equals now, at least in the most important way, their mutual respect for one another. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice steady. Dominic nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Of course," he replied. "Take all the time you need. But know that the offer stands." For the first time in years, Sophia felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Hope for something more than just survival. Hope for a future where she wasn't just the maid, but someone who could make a real difference. As she left the kitchen to return to her duties, Dominic watched her, feeling a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had been right to trust her, and he knew that whatever decision she made, it would be the right one. In that moment, Dominic realized that his empire wasn't built just on power. It was built on the people who surrounded him, the ones who taught him to be more than he ever thought he could be. And Sophia, in her quiet way, had done more for him than anyone else ever could. A few days after Dominic made the offer to Sophia, the air in the Valentino estate felt different. There was a shift, subtle but undeniable. The respect between him and Sophia had reached a new level. and Dominic could feel it. He had offered her more than a job. He had offered her an opportunity to change the way things worked in his world. He had never imagined that a woman like her, a maid, could have such an impact on his life. But now, as he watched her work around the house, he saw her in a new light. It wasn't just her quiet wisdom that had changed him. It was the way she carried herself, the dignity she exuded despite her position. She didn't seek power or recognition, yet she commanded both in ways Dominic couldn't ignore. Sophia, on the other hand, was still processing the gravity of Dominic's offer. She hadn't asked for this. She had never thought she would be anything more than the maid who quietly did her work, unnoticed. But Dominic's words lingered in her mind. He saw something in her, and that recognition was more powerful than anything she had ever experienced. The next day, Dominic invited Sophia to join him for a private dinner. It was unusual, but he felt it was time to show her that he valued her, not just for her advice, but for the person she was. When Sophia entered the room, Dominic was already seated at the table, a rare moment of calm in his otherwise hectic life. The candles flickered softly on the table, and the mood was unexpectedly intimate. "Please, sit," Dominic said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sophia hesitated, but she sat down, the silence between them stretching for a moment. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sophia said quietly. "I've always been just a maid, Mr. Valentino. I never thought I could be more than that." Dominic leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with intensity. "You are more than that," he said firmly. "You've always been more than that. I just didn't see it until now." Sophia looked down at her hands, unsure of how to respond. She had spent her entire life in service, never asking for anything in return. Dominic's words were a weight she hadn't expected. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted softly. "I don't know how to be more than what I've always been." Dominic reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "You don't have to be anything other than yourself, Sophia," he said. "You've already shown me what true strength is. Now it's my turn to show you that. I believe in you. You don't have to stay in the background anymore. I want you to be a part of something bigger, something where your voice matters." Sophia felt the warmth of his hand on hers, and for the first time, she felt seen in a way she never had before. The life she had known, the life where she had been invisible, suddenly felt distant. Could she really step into the world that Dominic was offering her? Could she take a place at his side, knowing the kind of man he was? Dominic withdrew his hand, but the connection lingered. "I don't expect you to make a decision right now," he said. "Take your time, but know that the opportunity is there." As the evening went on, the conversation shifted from serious to lighter topics. They talked about everything from Sophia's childhood to Dominic's unexpected love for vintage cars. It felt normal, in a way that Dominic wasn't used to. For so long, he had surrounded himself with people who feared him or wanted something from him. But with Sophia, it was different. She didn't fear him, and she wasn't trying to use him. She had always treated him as a person, not as the Mafia boss. And that made all the difference. As the evening drew to a close, Dominic stood up, his gaze lingering on Sophia for a moment longer than usual. "I'm glad you joined me tonight," he said, his voice softer than usual. Sophia nodded, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. I think I understand now. I just need some time to think." Dominic smiled back, a rare softness in his expression. "Take all the time you need. And when you're ready, I'll be here." Sophia left the room, her mind racing. For the first time, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something that could change the course of her life. She had always kept her distance from people in power, always remained in the background. But now, with Dominic's offer, the world was opening up to her in a way she had never imagined. As she walked down the hallway, Sophia realized that this wasn't just about a job. It was about the chance to change her life, to step into a world she had never allowed herself to dream of. And for the first time, she wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't be the same person anymore. Days turned into weeks, and the offer Dominic had made to Sophia lingered in her mind. It wasn't just the opportunity that had unsettled her, it was the shift in her own perspective. For years, Sophia had lived a life of quiet service, doing her job without complaint, never imagining that someone of Dominic's stature would ever notice her. But now, he was offering her a chance to be more. As she walked through the halls of the Valentino estate, The weight of this new reality pressed on her. She had always kept her distance from the world of power and wealth, not allowing herself to dream of a life outside the boundaries of her role. But Dominic had shown her a new way of thinking, one that made her question everything she had believed about herself. One afternoon, she found herself sitting in the garden, staring out at the sprawling grounds of the estate. The flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, but her mind was far from the beauty surrounding her. She thought of the offer Dominic had made, the kindness he had shown her, and how it made her feel both hopeful and uncertain. Could she really step into this world? Could she become someone who wasn't just invisible? As Sophia sat there lost in thought, Dominic appeared at the edge of the garden, his presence commanding yet unexpectedly gentle. "Sophia," he called, his voice carrying across the quiet air. She turned to look at him, surprised to see him standing there. "I didn't mean to disturb you," he said, stepping closer. "But I wanted to talk about the offer." Sophia stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt as she faced him. "I've been thinking a lot about it," she admitted, "and I still don't know what to say." Dominic smiled softly, his gaze steady. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "Take your time. But I wanted you to know that the offer isn't just about the job. It's about your worth. You've already proven to me that you are capable of so much more than what you've been doing. You have a mind that is sharp and a heart that is even sharper. That's why I want you to be a part of this, to make a difference." Sophia felt her heart race as his words sank in. She had never thought of herself in that way. She had always believed that her role in life was to stay in the background, to serve others. But now, Dominic was asking her to step forward, to be someone more than a maid. "I don't know if I can do this," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've spent my whole life being invisible. I don't know how to be anything else." Dominic's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "You've already been more than you think, Sophia," he said quietly. "You've helped me in ways I can't even begin to explain. You've taught me things that I never could have learned on my own. I want you to be by my side, not as someone who serves, but as someone who leads. I trust you. I believe in you." Sophia was silent for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Could she really do this? Could she leave behind the life she had known and step into a new world, one that held so much uncertainty? Dominic's eyes were sincere, his words genuine, and for the first time, Sophia felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt before: hope. She had always been afraid of stepping out of her comfort zone, afraid of what others would think, of failing. But now, with Dominic's belief in her, she felt as though she had a chance to be something more. "I don't know if I'm ready," Sophia finally said, her voice shaking slightly. "But maybe I can try." Dominic nodded, a smile forming on his lips. "That's all I'm asking. Take your time, and when you're ready, we'll figure it out together." As they stood there, the sun setting behind them, Sophia felt something shift within her. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She had a purpose, a chance to make a difference. Dominic had given her that. And for the first time in her life, Sophia felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something powerful. It wasn't just a job or an opportunity. It was the chance to rewrite her story, to step into a world where she could finally be seen. And as she looked into Dominic's eyes, she knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The days that followed Dominic's offer to Sophia were filled with a quiet tension, as though the very air around them was holding its breath. Sophia had agreed to consider his offer, but she was still uncertain. How could she, a simple maid, step into the world of power and influence that Dominic inhabited? The weight of his trust in her was both humbling and daunting. She spent hours walking the estate's grand hallways, her mind racing with possibilities, but always returning to the same question: could she truly be someone more than she had always been? For Dominic, the days were a bit more peaceful. His usual routines seemed less pressing, as though the offer to Sophia had eased a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. Still, he found himself thinking about her often, not just as the woman who had changed his way of thinking, but as someone he had come to admire in ways he had never expected. It was strange to him, this respect he felt for her. He had spent his life in a world where power was everything, where people sought to be near him for what they could gain. But Sophia had never sought anything. She had just been there, in the background, doing her work with dignity. And now, she had become a key figure in his life, whether she knew it or not. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dominic called for Sophia. It was time. The decision needed to be made, and he knew he had to give her the space to decide for herself. When she entered his office, her usual calmness was present, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. Dominic stood from behind his desk, a look of determination on his face. "Sophia," he said, his voice steady, "I know you've been thinking about my offer. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I respect it. But I also want you to know that I believe in you. I believe you can make a real difference, not just in my world, but in your own life too." Sophia met his gaze, her heart beating faster. She had never been the one to seek attention, never craved the spotlight. But something in Dominic's words stirred something deep inside her. Could she really make a difference? Could she really change her life, step out of the shadows and into a role where her voice mattered? "Mr. Valentino," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've spent my whole life believing that my place was in the background, serving others. I never thought I could be more than that. But now, I see that there is a chance to do something meaningful." Dominic's eyes softened as he listened to her. "You've always been more than you think, Sophia. I've watched you, and I've seen the strength you carry. Not many people can understand power the way you do. You have a clarity that I've come to value. I trust you." Sophia took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "But I want to try. I want to be more. Not just for you, but for myself." Dominic smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Then you've already made the right choice." He moved to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "This is the beginning, Sophia. The first step in a new chapter. You will no longer be in the background. You'll be by my side, making decisions, advising me. It won't be easy, but I know you're ready." Sophia felt a strange sense of excitement and fear mix in her chest. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She took the folder from him, feeling the weight of it in her hands. "Thank you, Mr. Valentino," she said quietly. "I won't let you down." Dominic nodded. "I know you won't." As she left his office that night, Sophia felt as though a door had opened in front of her. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She had a purpose, a place where she could make a real impact. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. And as she walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the grand silence of the estate, she realized that everything had changed. This was the beginning of something new, not just for her, but for Dominic as well. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, but Sophia knew one thing for certain. She was ready. The days following Sophia's decision felt like a turning point for both her and Dominic. Sophia, now stepping into her new role, felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The confidence she had gained from Dominic's trust was slowly growing, but the path ahead was uncharted. Her mind raced with all the possibilities, and yet, a part of her still wondered if she was truly ready for this shift. Dominic, for his part, watched her closely, not with the critical eye of a boss, but with a quiet admiration. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, but Sophia was different. She wasn't like the others who were driven by ambition or a desire to prove themselves. She wasn't here for the power, and that was something Dominic found refreshing. As Sophia worked alongside him, helping him with decisions and offering advice, she began to see how complicated and dangerous his world truly was. The Mafia life was one of constant tension, power struggles, and decisions that carried heavy consequences. But Dominic had a way of making it all look effortless, like a king with absolute control. There were moments when Sophia felt out of place, unsure of whether she belonged in this world of ruthless negotiations and shadowy dealings. But then, she would see the way Dominic interacted with his men, how they respected him, and she realized that he wasn't just a figurehead. He was a leader, and more than that, he was a man who had earned his power through more than just force. It was his ability to understand people, to read situations, and to know when to act that made him the man he was. And it was that understanding that Sophia had come to admire. One afternoon, Dominic called Sophia into his office. She walked in with a sense of purpose, but also a touch of hesitation, unsure of what was coming next. Dominic was sitting at his desk, reviewing some documents. But when he saw her, he put them aside and gestured for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm and measured. "You've made quite an impression here. You've brought a perspective I hadn't expected, and I think it's time we put that to the test. Sophia looked at him, her heart pounding. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady but curious. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. There's an issue that's been brewing with one of our rivals, he said. I could handle it the usual way, but I want to hear your thoughts on how we should approach it. Sophia's mind raced. She had never been asked to weigh in on something this important. Her experience with the Mafia world was still limited, but she trusted Dominic's judgment. And, for the first time, she felt a spark of confidence. I think, she began slowly, that we should let them think they have the advantage. It's the same strategy you taught me before. We can make them think they have control, while we quietly work behind the scenes to strengthen our position. That way, when we strike, they'll be caught off guard, and we'll be in a much stronger position. Dominic watched her closely as she spoke, impressed by her clarity and thoughtfulness. She had no experience in the cutthroat world he lived in, but her instinct was sharp. I like that, he said after a moment, his eyes meeting hers with approval. You've got a good head on your shoulders, Sophia. Sophia felt a surge of pride, but she didn't let it show. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to get distracted. Thank you, Mr. Valentino, she said quietly. Dominic nodded, standing up and walking over to the window. You're not just a maid, Sophia, he said, his voice soft but firm. You're a partner, and I'm glad to have you by my side. Sophia was taken aback by his words. Partner? The idea still felt strange to her, but as she looked at him, she realized that she had earned it. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was someone who mattered. As the days went by, Dominic and Sophia worked side by side, navigating the complex world of the Mafia together. Sophia found herself growing into her new role, gaining confidence with every decision they made. She began to see the nuances of the business, understanding that it wasn't just about power, it was about influence, patience, and knowing when to take action and when to wait. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with a rival faction, Dominic stood outside on the balcony of his estate, staring out at the city below. Sophia joined him, her presence a calming one. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, watching the lights flicker in the distance. After a while, Dominic spoke, his voice low. You were right, he said, his tone more thoughtful than usual. The strategy we used worked perfectly. We've gained the upper hand, and now we're in control. Sophia looked at him, her eyes soft. I'm glad it worked, she said simply. Dominic turned to her, a slight smile on his lips. It's not just the strategy, Sophia. It's you. You've changed the way I see things. And I couldn't have done it without you. Sophia felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never expected to hear words like that from Dominic, and yet, here he was, acknowledging her contribution. In that moment, Sophia realized that she wasn't just part of his world. She was changing it. The next few weeks brought a sense of change to the Valentino estate. What had begun as a simple offer from Dominic to Sophia had evolved into a partnership neither of them could have predicted. Dominic found himself relying more and more on Sophia's insights, her perspective becoming invaluable in his decision-making. He trusted her judgment, something he had never offered to anyone outside of his closest circle. For Sophia, the days were a whirlwind of new responsibilities and challenges. It felt overwhelming at times, but with each decision they made together, she gained more confidence. The transition from maid to advisor was not easy, but it was necessary. And in that transition, Sophia learned something new about herself. She was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. One evening, Dominic asked Sophia to join him for dinner at the estate, a rare invitation that caught her by surprise. She had become accustomed to working alongside him in meetings and in strategy sessions, but this was different. The personal nature of the invitation made her feel something new, an unspoken respect, one that extended beyond their professional relationship. As she entered the dining room, she saw Dominic already seated at the long, elegant table. He rose when she entered, offering her a seat with a gesture that seemed both formal and sincere. Please sit, he said. Tonight, I wanted to talk about something more than business. Sophia sat down, her curiosity piqued. What's on your mind? She asked. Dominic took a moment before responding. It's about everything, he began, his tone serious. About how things have changed between us. I've never worked this closely with anyone like this before. Sophia nodded, not sure where this conversation would lead, but knowing it was important. Dominic leaned forward, his gaze intense. You've shown me that there's more to this life than just taking control by force. You've shown me that patience, understanding, and trust are just as powerful. And I've come to respect you in ways I didn't expect. Sophia's heart raced at his words. She had always known that Dominic was a man of power and influence, but hearing him speak this way about her, it was almost overwhelming. Thank you, she said quietly, unsure of how to respond. But I don't think I've done anything special. I've just been trying to do what's right. Dominic smiled, a soft but genuine smile that made her feel more at ease. That's what makes you different. You're not in this for the power. You're here because you believe in doing what's right. And I've come to admire that. Sophia felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had spent her life in the shadows, never thinking she could make a real difference. But now, with Dominic's words, she began to see that she had a place in this world, a place where she mattered, where her voice had weight. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they shared a meal, but Sophia couldn't help but reflect on what Dominic had said. It had been a long road from the woman who had quietly cleaned his mansion to the advisor who now played an integral role in his decisions. But this wasn't just a professional shift. It was a personal one as well. She had found a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed. As the evening drew to a close, Dominic stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the estate. He turned to Sophia, his expression thoughtful. You've already changed the way I see the world, he said softly. I know I've said this before, but it's true. You've taught me more about power and leadership than anyone else ever could. Sophia met his gaze, her eyes steady. I've learned a lot from you too, she replied. You've shown me what true strength looks like, not just in the battles we fight, but in how we treat others. Dominic nodded, his expression more solemn now. It's easy to let power go to your head, to think that controlling everything around you makes you strong, he said. But you've reminded me that real strength comes from knowing when to step back, when to listen, and when to trust someone else's judgment. Sophia smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to him. It was more than just business now. They had formed a partnership based on mutual respect, and that respect had forged a bond between them that went beyond their professional roles. Dominic walked over to where Sophia was sitting, pausing to look at her with a warmth that was rare for him. I don't think you realize just how much you've already contributed, Sophia, he said. You've helped me see a different way of leading, a way that involves others, not just my own will. Sophia stood, her heart full. Thank you for giving me this chance, she said. I'll keep working hard to earn your trust. Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. You already have, he said. And in that moment, Sophia knew that her life had changed. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was someone who had earned a place at Dominic's side, someone who had proven that her voice was worth listening to. This was only the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. Days passed, and Sophia's role at the Valentino estate continued to evolve. She was no longer just a maid. She had become a trusted advisor, a key figure in Dominic's decisions. The respect she had earned from him was evident in their every interaction. But for Sophia, the change was still surreal. She had never imagined a life where her opinions carried weight, where her voice was considered essential. She spent countless hours with Dominic, helping him navigate through complex situations, offering her perspective on everything from business deals to personal matters. Every time she spoke, it felt like she was gaining a new layer of confidence, a new understanding of her own strength. Dominic, for his part, watched Sophia closely. He had never expected to find someone like her, someone who not only understood the intricacies of the business world, but also brought a calm wisdom that balanced his own intense drive. He had always trusted his instincts, but now, those instincts led him to trust Sophia as well. Together, they began to form a partnership that was stronger than either of them had anticipated. One evening, Dominic called Sophia to his office. The decision they had been waiting for had finally arrived. The rival group that had once been a threat was now on the verge of making their move, and it was up to them to decide how to handle it. As Sophia walked into his office, she felt a sense of urgency in the air. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. Dominic looked up from his desk, his gaze steady as he met her eyes. It's time, he said simply. Sophia nodded, her mind already racing through the options. She knew this wasn't just about business. This was about proving herself. Proving that the trust Dominic had placed in her was not misplaced. "What's your plan?" Dominic asked. Sophia paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "We can't be rash," she began. "We need to let them think they have the upper hand, just like we did before. But this time, we need to go a step further. We use their own mistakes against them, make them believe they can win, and then we pull the rug out from under them." Dominic raised an eyebrow, impressed by the clarity of her plan. "Go on," he urged. Sophia continued, her voice growing more confident. "They'll try to push us into a corner, maybe make a move that they think will force us to act. But we need to wait for the perfect moment. When they're too confident, when they've overextended themselves, that's when we strike. We can't let them dictate the pace. We control the timing." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "And what's your plan for the next step?" Sophia smiled slightly, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Once they've made their move, we step in and cut off their supply lines. We'll isolate them, hit them where it hurts them most. When they're scrambling to protect themselves, that's when we hit hard." Dominic sat in silence for a moment, weighing her words. Then he smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but Sophia recognized it. It was the look he gave when he was impressed, when he saw something that made him believe in the plan. "I like it," he said, nodding slowly. "You've learned well, Sophia. We'll go with your plan." Sophia felt a wave of pride wash over her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. Dominic had trusted her, believed in her abilities. Now, it was time to prove herself. The next few days were tense, with every movement and decision feeling like a step closer to the inevitable. Sophia spent long hours in meetings with Dominic, finalizing the details of their plan, ensuring that every angle was covered. As the days passed, the rival group grew bolder, making public moves that suggested they were ready to make their play. Dominic and Sophia remained patient, biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, on the night everything came to a head, Dominic received word that the rival group had made their move. They had pushed too far, overstepping their boundaries, and now they were vulnerable. Sophia's plan was about to be set into motion. Dominic looked at her, his expression calm but focused. "It's time," he said simply. Sophia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment they had worked toward. She had come a long way from the woman who had once been invisible in the background. Now, she was at the forefront of the action. As they prepared to make their move, Sophia felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about defeating their rivals. It was about showing Dominic, and herself, that she belonged. This was the culmination of everything they had built together. And when the dust settled, Sophia knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a maid. She was a force to be reckoned with, a partner in every sense of the word. And nothing could take that away from her. The aftermath of their successful maneuver against the rival group left Dominic and Sophia with a sense of accomplishment, but it also marked a new chapter in their partnership. The strategy had been flawless, the rival group defeated without the need for violence or unnecessary confrontation. Dominic had always prided himself on being a man of action, but Sophia's plan had shown him another way, a more thoughtful, strategic way to wield power. And it was a way that had brought them closer together. As the days passed, Dominic found himself relying on Sophia more and more. She wasn't just his advisor anymore. She was his confidant, someone he trusted implicitly. And Sophia, for her part, felt a deep sense of gratitude toward him. She had never imagined she would be here, standing beside him, making decisions that shaped the future of his empire. The dynamic between them had shifted. Dominic, once the commanding force in the room, now listened intently to Sophia's thoughts, valuing her opinions as much as his own. She had proven herself time and time again, and now, she had earned her place at his side. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Dominic invited Sophia to his office for a private discussion. It was rare for him to pull her away from the work they had been doing, but tonight, he needed to talk to her about something personal. As Sophia entered his office, she noticed a certain seriousness in the air. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his expression thoughtful as he gestured for her to take a seat across from him. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but tinged with something that Sophia couldn't quite place. "About everything that's happened, about how far we've come. You've done more than just help me. You've changed the way I see things." You've given me a new perspective on power, leadership, and trust. Sophia listened quietly, unsure of where the conversation was going. I never expected someone like you to come into my life, Sophia, Dominic continued, his eyes locking onto hers. Someone who wasn't afraid to speak the truth. Someone who wasn't just trying to climb the ladder for their own benefit. You've shown me that true strength doesn't come from holding others down. It comes from lifting them up. And that's exactly what you've done for me. Sophia felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never heard him speak like this before. Dominic had always been a man of action, someone who valued results above all else. But now, he was speaking of something deeper, something more meaningful. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, he said quietly. You've changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Sophia's heart swelled with emotion, but she kept her composure. You've given me the opportunity to prove myself, she replied softly. I never asked for anything, but you believed in me when no one else did. Dominic stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. I don't think I truly understood what it meant to have someone like you by my side, he said, his voice distant. But now, I realize how much I need you. Not just as an advisor, but as a partner. Someone who will be with me every step of the way. Sophia felt a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The idea of being Dominic's partner in everything was both thrilling and intimidating. She had never expected to be so close to someone like him, someone with so much power, so much weight on his shoulders. I'm not sure what the future holds, Sophia said slowly, but I'm willing to find out with you. Dominic turned to face her, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. That's all I ask, he said. Together, we'll face whatever comes next. As Sophia left his office that night, her mind was swirling with everything that had transpired. The trust that Dominic had placed in her, the connection they had built, it was all more than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a key player in a world that was once so far beyond her reach. And as she walked down the hallway, she realized that the journey they had begun together was just beginning. There would be more challenges, more decisions to make. But for the first time in her life, Sophia felt truly ready. She wasn't the same woman who had quietly served in the shadows. She had become someone who could make a difference, someone whose voice was heard. And with Dominic by her side, she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. The months that followed were marked by change and growth. Dominic and Sophia, once only employer and maid, had now become true partners in both business and strategy. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than either had anticipated. As time went on, Sophia began to embrace her new role more fully, no longer just an advisor, but a trusted equal, one whose voice was as valued as Dominic's own. Dominic, once a man who relied only on his own instincts and strength, had come to understand the value of patience and insight, traits that Sophia had introduced into his world. They faced challenges together, with Sophia's careful planning and Dominic's decisive actions forming a perfect balance. Their enemies, once a constant source of tension, now found themselves on the defensive. The rival groups that had once posed a threat to Dominic's empire were now crumbling, weakened by the strategic moves that Sophia had helped orchestrate. The estate was quieter now, with fewer meetings and fewer confrontations, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a sense of calm, an understanding that their power didn't need to be flaunted. It could be subtle, yet still just as effective. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Dominic and Sophia sat together in his study, reviewing the latest reports. Sophia was deep in thought, her eyes scanning the papers. When Dominic spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said, leaning back in his chair. Sophia looked up, her brow furrowing slightly in curiosity. About what? She asked. Dominic met her gaze with a seriousness she had not seen in him before. About us. About how far we've come, he said. When you first started here, you were just the maid. I never imagined that I would trust you with my empire, with my future. But now, I can't imagine running things without you by my side. Sophia felt a wave of emotion at his words. She had never expected this. Never imagined that the man who had once seen her as nothing more than a servant would come to rely on her in such a way. You've changed my life, Sophia, Dominic continued. You've shown me a new way to lead, a way that doesn't rely on fear, but on trust and respect. And that's something I'll never forget. Sophia took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had come so far from the woman who had once hidden in the background, doing her work silently, unnoticed. Now, she stood by Dominic, making decisions that affected the future of everything they had built. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. "I've learned from you too," Sophia said softly. "From the way you think, the way you act. I never imagined I would be here, making decisions alongside you, shaping the future of this empire." Dominic smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We've built something together, Sophia," he said. "And it's something I never thought I'd have. A partner, a confidant, someone I can trust." Sophia nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. She had always known that she was capable of more, but this was beyond anything she had ever dreamed. The life she had imagined, the one where she stayed in the shadows, was gone. She had stepped into the light, and with it, she had claimed a place in a world she had never thought possible. As the weeks passed, their bond only grew stronger. Dominic and Sophia continued to lead together, their decisions guided by a shared vision of what they could accomplish. Dominic had become more than just a mafia boss. He had become a man who understood the importance of collaboration, of listening to others, of knowing when to lead and when to follow. And Sophia, once a quiet, invisible figure, had become a symbol of strength and wisdom, someone who had proven that anyone, regardless of their past, could make a difference. One day, as they stood together on the balcony of the estate, overlooking the city below, Sophia turned to Dominic. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she asked. Dominic looked at her, his eyes filled with appreciation and respect. "Yes, we have," he replied. "And I couldn't have done it without you." Sophia smiled, a sense of contentment settling over her. She had found a place in this world, a place where her voice mattered, where her decisions carried weight. She had changed not just her own life, but the life of the man who had once been a stranger, and in doing so, she had created a future that was brighter than either of them had ever imagined. And as they stood together, knowing that they had built something powerful, something lasting, they both understood that this was just the beginning. The future was theirs, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way, side by side.